Today on the TMZ Podcast.
Welcome to the TMZ Podcast. Derek and Eric here. How you doing?
I'm good. A little sad.
Yeah, some sad news this morning because it really is the end of an era. Jerry Springer, the host of the longtime tabloid talk show that just absolutely dominated culture for more than a decade, I would say.
Almost 30 years.
The show was on 27 years, and it was omnipresent for the better part of 2 decades. He passed away at his home in Cook County outside of Chicago around 5 a.m. today. He died from, we're told it was pancreatic cancer, maybe an aggressive form of cancer, and, he passed away. He was active up until the very end of his life. That show ran from 1991 to 2018, which is incredible.
And then he had the Judge Jerry show.
Yeah,
After that, he had a podcast. He was
on The Masked Singer as the Beatle. I mean, Jerry Springer is such a cultural institution, and he sort of enjoyed the last few years of his life just being Jerry Springer. I mean, this is a guy who, when you walk down the street, would be serenaded with chants of Jerry. Jerry. He's as mononymous as you can be with a common name like Jerry.
Right.
If you say Jerry, you think of Jerry Springer.
There were points for people who were maybe a little bit younger, and they know the name. I think everybody knows that name. It's part of culture. But there was a point in the late 90s where in some markets he was beating Oprah.
Unbelievable.
The show
when I read that.
It was sort of it wasn't a reality show. It was a talk show, but it sort of kicked off reality, like the ridiculous I Married a Horse episode and
unbelievable
catfishing, like the whole catfishing thing we think started with Neve and MTV. He was doing that before that.
Yeah, the show was so big. And it's what's interesting to me is in 1991 when the show started, they positioned Jerry Springer as this sort of new Phil Donahue. He's a lawyer by trade. He was in politics. He was one time the mayor of Cincinnati. I mean, he is a pretty decorated or pedigreed individual in a lot of ways, and he wanted to do this sober show that was like walking up and down the stairs like Phil Donahue and asking questions on the topics of the day. They pivoted in 1994 to this sort of bringing out people with sort of problems
just
to air them out.
Tabloid
craziness. There would be a lot of fighting on the show. Some of it turned out to be scripted. It really
Chairs
didn't matter.
were flying. You could tell some of it was scripted.
We knew that at the time, and it was just enjoyable to watch.
It was like wrestling.
It was like wrestling. It had that sort of element to it. And, he was always there in his sweater. He wouldn't get into the fray. He wasn't like Morton Downey, who was another tabloid guy. He was just like sort of observing.
He said that he sort of just fell into this show, that he, the head of the network took him to lunch and said, Phil Donahue's done. You're taking over his show. Yeah. And he was like, okay.
Yeah, sure.
And tried to figure it out. And he, like I said, he was into politics. And that was sort of what worked about Jerry Springer in the show, is that he always seemed sort of in disbelief, like, can you believe this is on television?
Yes.
Like, he was sort of the calm thing in the middle of this crazy storm, just like,
he was the avatar for the viewer observing this craziness. He wasn't in the fray. He wasn't sort of high energy or anything like that.
The audience did that for him.
The audience would do it. They would chant and hoot and holler. He would do this thing called Final Thought at the end where he would have this sort of like off-camera interview and just sort of sincerely lay out a sort of philosophical pearl of wisdom.
It'd always be like him trying to be so rational and thoughtful about like, so this is what happens when you marry your grandmother.
Unbelievable.
Like,
do you remember he would end it with sometimes, take care of yourself and each other. And after watching a spectacle where chairs were flying at people's faces, sometimes they would get bloodied up. I mean, the show was so big and the fights were so central to it that you remember Steve Wilco, the bald-headed, large sort of bouncer figure who would break up the fights, got his own show and was a huge celebrity for a period of time as well as a spinoff from the Jerry Springer show. It was just gigantic.
But that's the thing. He somehow, to me, remained so likable.
He could.
People. There were always think pieces about how Jerry Springer and it's horrible and ruining America, and maybe it did. But there was something about him that just always seemed like, I can't believe this. Yeah. He just seemed sort of like such a down to earth person, very aware.
He was a politician, and look, he had a bit of like Teflon to him. There's a very famous story about Jerry Springer early in his political career, which he's owned up to. He wrote a personal check to a prostitute, and it became sort of this story that could have sunk the career of any politician. I mean, imagine that. You're caught.
Well, it did sort of sink his political career.
It did sort of. I mean, he was a city council member, and then he sort of leaned into it, and he was still relevant. He was getting like sort of he was competitive in politics for a while, and then he pivoted to television, but it wasn't as if he ran away from it. He was not shameless in sort of this brag.
He doesn't want to talk about it, or he's like, yeah, it's a thing I did. It was a dumb thing to do.
Yeah, he sort of understood it. He had a little bit of self-deprecation to him.
And his political career, I didn't realize this until today, he never could have been president, though. He was born in London.
That's
I didn't know Jerry Springer was not born in America.
I mean, his parents were Holocaust survivors. They fled Nazi Germany. I mean, he had a very, very interesting life. It's very sad to see someone like this pass away, because they are really a tether to a different era, but sort of presaged the current one we're
that's
in.
the thing. He is such a huge part of the last 30 years in the past, but he's so relevant to right now. So many of the things he did, we're still kind of in. The comment on any social media post is basically the audience at Jerry Springer. You're just screaming and throwing chairs. Like, that's what it is.
And as you said, like during the rise and the run of the Jerry Springer show, there were countless think pieces in the New Yorker and the Atlantic about this being the downfall of American civilization and so forth. And he really became sort of the symbol of something ugly and dark in American culture. But I think what you'll see here is he did retain that likability. I think as this death sort of like makes its way through the news cycle, I think you will see a lot more positive comments and about how influential he was, and not necessarily a lot of pot shots, because Jerry was aware of it. It didn't seem like he was just cashing in on the base instincts of the American psyche. It seemed like he was sort of observing this absurdity, along with us.
He seemed a little bit removed, and he was never part of it. And it's funny, I read he did a podcast just last fall, and I don't know if he knew about his cancer diagnosis then, because I know it happened very quickly. And he was asked if he thought he was the granddad of reality television. And he says, like, I think I ruined the culture.
Yeah.
And
he would say things like this.
A thing he said, this is sort of jokey, but it kind of just struck me this morning. He said, I just hope hell isn't that hot, because I burn real easy. I'm very light complected, and that kind of worries me. I like to think now that he's gone, he doesn't have to worry about that.
I would hope so. I think that's such a fitting conclusion. Check out our website.
A final thought
on Jerry Springer himself. So with that, I would say go to our website. There's a clip. We always do this in our death stories. As a final note, we put up the last time we saw a celebrity.
Right.
And what was interesting about Jerry Springer, I watched it on our website, and we got him outside, and he was obviously, very associated with Cincinnati. He was the mayor of there. He lived near in the Midwest and so forth. And we asked him about, like, hey, what do you think about the Bengals? What do you think about Antonio Brown? And it often seemed like people wanted to get him to jump into the fray of controversy, and he doesn't.
He was never that person.
He was like not that guy, even though he hosted that show.
He was always controversy adjacent, but was never really part of it himself.
Absolutely. They were saying, what do you think of Antonio Brown, who was getting in trouble? He was a wide receiver, and he goes, I'm not going to pounce on the guy. He has a very measured approach. He said, look, until all the facts come out, I don't feel like I need to pile on. And then he got into his waiting car, and it was just so Jerry. And I think that's a side of him that people don't
for all
realize.
The wild situations that are on his show, whether they were real or not, he never really cast judgment.
Yeah.
He was just, okay, here's the situation.
Yeah. I'll miss him. He's an absolute institution. All right. Before we move on to our next story, I wanted to take a brief moment to tell you about this episode being sponsored by BLUECHEW. Let's talk about sex. Summer's around the corner. Do you want to bring the heat in the bedroom, Eric? Now you can increase
I don't like you saying that to me. Like looking you in the eye, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. So listen up. BLUECHEW.com. Take them anytime, day or night. So plan ahead and be ready whenever the opportunity arises.
And the best part about this is you can do it all online. So, you don't have to have any awkward conversations with people or go to a doctor or like wait in line at the pharmacy. You can just do it all, have it shipped right to you. It's easy.
Now, the big question is, does it work? You're ordering these things. You want to know whether in the moment when things are going so well in the bedroom, is it going to work? Do you think you even need it? Try it for a month and see. I mean, I think you're going to absolutely love this experience.
Yeah, it's they say there's nothing sexier than confidence, and BLUECHEW can give you the confidence you need where it counts, when it counts.
So BLUECHEW wants to help you have better sex. Discover all your options at BLUECHEW.com. Chew it and do it. And we got a special deal for our listeners. Try BLUECHEW free when you use our promo code TMZ at checkout. Just pay $5 for shipping. That's BLUECHEW.com, promo code TMZ to receive your first month free. Visit BLUECHEW.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank BLUECHEW for sponsoring the podcast. All right, so now moving on to a sort of, I would say, less consequential story, but an interesting one nonetheless.
It's a big one, though.
It is a big story, and it's sort of developing slowly and bubbling under the surface. Glen Powell and Sydney Sweeney, two stars of a movie, two big rising stars of Hollywood. Glen Powell had a great turn in Top Gun Maverick. Sydney Sweeney, obviously, on Euphoria and White Lotus and so forth. So they're having a moment, and they've been sort of very close on set, and there now have been rumors that this has upset their significant others who they're with. Glen Powell has a girlfriend named Gigi Paris, or did have a girlfriend.
It seems like they're done now.
Yes.
There were rumblings of this the other day that she unfollowed Sydney Sweeney on social media, and it's like, ooh, that's a weird sign.
Yeah, people were really reading into this, wondering whether...
it seems like people have been willing this couple into existence. Maybe it already was, we don't know, but... So now, amidst all the rumors and speculation, she's not only Gigi Paris, his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, has not only unfollowed Sydney, she's unfollowed Glen.
Yeah.
And then she did a post where it said, know your worth and on to the next.
Yeah. So it sounds like this relationship is over. The timing is very significant, given that it comes on the heels of all this stuff with Sydney Powell. And a lot of that was generated by just the way they were behaving in some candid photos. You work together on a movie, you have to be close, you have to do, love scenes and so forth.
You have to have chemistry.
But there were also pics of them, off camera at the zoo, sort of hanging out. There's a certain look to Sydney Sweeney sort of gazing lovingly or adoringly at Glen Powell.
There were red carpet photos where they're like swooning over each other. It looks like there's chemistry and there's actors and then there's something's going on here.
Yeah, and I always have some skepticism because they're also promoting a movie. Of course. This is good to have headlines. It's good to have heat. It's good to have people talking about the two stars of an upcoming movie. So some people who are a bit more cynical, we've heard in our room, Charlie was saying, this is all an act. They're leaning into it so that you get these headlines and people go see the movie. I'm not so sure. Now, his girlfriend has broken up with him.
Right.
What's going on in Sydney's life is she's actually engaged. She has a fiance, a guy named Jonathan Davino. And there's a photo of him sort of walking her dog. So, that photo seems to indicate that things are okay there. Sydney has had her reps say, look, I'm still engaged. That's my fiance. And this is all just tabloid fodder. So they appear to be okay. Now it looks like Glen Powell is broken up. I'm wondering if the next shoe to drop is something in this relationship. That's obviously what people are waiting for.
We saw him walking away with her dog. We never saw him come back.
That's right.
I'm just saying.
And I'll also say this is the thinnest proof imaginable. I mean, it is a photo of a man walking a dog, and everyone's like, their relationship must be swell. I walk a lot of animals. It says nothing to my relationship.
But also, and again, like they've been together a long time, Sydney and her fiance. They're engaged. It's a little different situation than Glen and his girlfriend. And so maybe, even if this is still not, if there's nothing between Glen and Sydney, or if it was just for publicity, his girlfriend could have just been like, just the conversation of it in the public is embarrassing to her. She might be like, you know what? We're not married. We're not engaged.
Yeah.
This is too much for me.
Yeah, it could have just been too much. She's a model herself, and she said, I want out, and I don't like the way this looks. Maybe she was upset that Glen didn't stamp out the rumors quickly enough, because really what happened was we saw these photos, people started rumbling about them, and instead of nipping that in the bud, they sort of let it play out a little bit, because it's obviously, as I said, good for publicity.
It's good for the movie. It's good for them. Like, they're both up-and-coming people. Like you said, he had Maverick, one of the biggest movies of all time. He wasn't the star of it, but he was certainly memorable in it.
Iceman Part 2.
Yeah, that was a big come-up for him. She is super hot right now with White Lotus and Euphoria. And this is that next level. That's what you always see with these celebrities when they're kind of on the cusp. Relationship drama gets them headlines. Yeah. And then everybody knows their name.
That's right.
And this is being very cynical in Hollywood, it's a good career move.
Look, old Hollywood used to do this all the time. I brought this up. Judy Garland, the star of Wizard of Oz, they tried to put her with Mickey Rooney, one of the rising stars of the 30s as well. And they tried to make them a couple, and they dated for a little while, but it was purely a construct of the Hollywood machine.
And
that's
part. To the point of Gigi Paris here, was why I don't know this is 100% proof of anything about Glen and Sydney. Either the two of them are dating now. They fell in love on set, and that is the end of their relationship. Or even if it's just the rumor of it, she's just tired of hearing about it. Yeah. I don't want to be part of this weird Hollywood rumor mill thing, and she might be done with that.
Yeah, I wanted to date you, that was fine, but this is icky now, and then maybe she's just I can move on. She's a beautiful model. I don't know if you've ever seen her yourself.
Oh, yeah,
she's going to have her
she'll be all
options in the world. I'm not too concerned. Don't lose any sleep over Gigi Paris. I mean, it's sad that the relationship ended, but I can understand tapping out of this. Although she's a model, maybe you would think she'd be a little bit more savvy about this kind of publicity, but maybe
not everybody
maybe
wants.
She's not into it.
Even if you want to be famous, you don't want to be famous that way.
I guess
because especially in this situation, if people are thinking, oh, he's dating Sydney behind his girlfriend's back, it kind of makes her look like a chump. That she's just like, oh, I guess my boyfriend's dating someone else. Maybe you don't want to be that person.
Yeah, no.
Like, look, I'm not interested in playing this game. Goodbye.
Right, and you have to wonder whether Jonathan Davino, the fiance of Sydney Sweeney, will want to play this game for much longer. It sounds like he does. He looks like a kind of confident,
they're
swagger
engaged.
guy.
It's a different relationship.
Yeah, I think it predates. It's a more sort of stable and grounded relationship.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see, but that'll do it for us today. We'll see you guys tomorrow.